We can still celebrate it.
Right.
There's never a shortcomings they come out and celebrate.
What's that? This is the presenter tool. You ready for me to go, Roger? Cool? All right. I know everybody in here, so I'm not going to introduce myself. But I appreciate y'all coming. I think this is going to be a fun talk. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, artificial intelligence, and you'll see how it's kind of broken up into three different subcomponents. One is, what are the ways in which we're leveraging artificial intelligence to serve us, to help us perform our jobs? What are the ways we're starting to replace ourselves with artificial intelligence? And then I'm going to end with kind of a cautionary tale of, I think, where artificial intelligence is going and why I think it's an issue. So, without further ado, I'm not going to read out this whole block of artificial intelligence, but it gives you a definition of what I mean when I say artificial intelligence. And so we're using these computer algorithms, methods, methodologies, in order to enable machines to understand the world, right? So we think about, what does it mean for us to be intelligent? Now we can think about, okay, what is artificially intelligent? What are we creating to be intelligent out in the real world? Put more plainly, AI is the automation of cognition. And so we can think about the human information processing model, everything from perceiving the world all the way to the execution of the action. But when we think about intelligence, we're going to be talking about specifically cognition and cognitive intelligence. And I think there is a strong case to be made that intelligence isn't just one construct, but for purposes of this talk, we're going to be talking about what seems to be the most difficult part of intelligence, which is the cognitive part. And this is distinct from artificial general intelligence. And so you'll hear people conflate these terms a lot. But artificial general intelligence is that ability to reason through and learn about any task much in the same way that a human would. So a lot of artificial intelligence now is very domain specific, and it may have the opportunity to kind of learn online. But artificial general intelligence is kind of that gold standard. So if you watch anything like Ex Machina, if you watch anything like 2001 Space Odyssey, you know it's this general intelligence, this ability to navigate throughout its world. And it's really seeking to duplicate what it is that makes us human. So how do we create artificial intelligence? Well, for something to have intelligence, we have to be able to reason through and make decisions. And at this point, we turn to computer science for the intelligence. So we can think about responses being hard-coded in, or they can be the result of a decision based on learned association. So one example of a hard-coded representation here is a simple statement, where I throw my presenter tool. So just amazed by this beautiful three-line code. Where the system asks you what's your name, it stores what your name is, and then it returns and says, it's nice to meet you. Now in this case, obviously the system has no preconceived notion of what it's doing, its engagement with you. It doesn't have an understanding or mental representation of it being nice to meet me. It's purely just pretending, in this case, to be intelligent, to have this back and forth. But another way we can go about it is what we refer to as machine learning. And so I'm sure you all have heard a lot about these ideas of machine learning, deep neural networks. And so I want to present a really kind of rudimentary explanation as to what machine learning actually is. And I'm happy to go into depth at another time, but now's not really the place and time. But we think about machine learning as being kind of a representation of the neurons in your brain. And so each one of these nodes represents a source of information, and then it's going to connect to every other node in there. And one of the ways we train these networks... Uh-oh, the computers are revolting here. There we go. We can feed in a whole bunch of information, so we can give it a whole bunch of pictures of cats and a whole bunch of pictures of dogs, tell them what is a cat, what is a dog, and what the machine is doing is learning the associations. So it knows what the output is, it knows it's a dog, it knows it's a cat, And it's saying, okay, what are distinct about these images that is going to allow us to get the correct association here? And so it's fine-tuning all of these essentially regressions. And so all machine learning is, in a very basic sense, is a series of regressions where it fine-tunes the model of biases and the weights of those regressions. And then after we perform all of these training trials, we then give it new trials, because we don't want to train it on, or we don't want to test on what we've already trained it on. We say, okay, here's a picture. Is that a cat or a dog? And then we evaluate how well it does. So you're actually helping to train a lot of machine learning algorithms in your everyday life. And so if you see these kind of, I'm not a robot, verify you're a human, what you're doing here is training these systems to detect what it's asking you to detect. And so in this case, select all squares with the street signs. And so you're going through and selecting it. And one of the reasons they use this is because it's an inherently hard task for machines to decipher. And so it's a good way of determining if you're human. But also, if you'll notice, almost all of these images that you'll see in your day-to-day have something to do with driving. And we'll get to the actual training of AI for self-driving cars here in a little bit. So why would we even include psychology and AI research? Most people think of AI as being a purely computer science domain or even a mathematics domain. Obviously, we're inherently social creatures. We don't want systems that are not going to interact with us in the same way that we interact with one another. We want to be able to have a natural interaction with these systems, and we want these systems to be able to pick up on the cues that we inherently pick up on. I can tell based off your body posture, where you're looking, your skin flush, vocal intonations, if you're interested in what I'm saying, if you're mad at me, if I've lost your trust. But psychologists can also inform the cognitive and decision-making processes that are becoming really important when training these systems, and also the physiological correlates to predict these. And I'll talk a little bit about some research I'm interested in doing. Oops. And then it's also important to understand the human limitations, which need to be fed into any sort of accurate AI model. And so for something to be really intelligent, it has to be able to predict the consequences of what's to come. And so I want to talk really quickly about AI to serve us. And there's a lot of different domains wherein we have artificial intelligence that is augmenting our capabilities, right? So think about Siri, Alexa, Cortana. We're also using it in things like cancer screening. And so because these systems are just looking for patterns, they're a lot better at picking up actual representations of patterns and are able to predict cancer metastases substantially before humans now. We're getting to the point now where this is enhancing our ability to detect early on. Also things like TSA screening, Roombas, understanding how to navigate your environment. Your spam filter is an example of machine learning artificial intelligence, of learning what is spam, what is not. And then also things like your phones and systems learning about you. And so you may have had the case where you get in your car, your phone connects to your Bluetooth, and it knows based off a patterning of your day-to-day that this is about the time you go home, and it says this is how long it's going to take you to get home. Do you want directions to get there? So why should we leverage AI to serve us in these capacities? Obviously, there is greater computational capability for AI in specific domains, right? And so you can think about the ability to navigate your environment through GPS. It's performing a whole bunch of calculations really quickly about what is the optimal way to get home that A, you don't have access to that information. Even if you did, it would take a long time to sort through, okay, what are the traffic patterns, what are the road closures, etc. It's also a lot better at accurate pattern recognition than we are. We tend to be good at seeing patterns, but we also tend to be good at making up patterns. And this is why things like superstitions exist, because people start seeing correlations between cause and effect, or what they perceive to be cause and effect. It also allows us to automate the mundane and difficult, right? If I don't have to vacuum, if I can just let Roomba do its thing, life gets a lot better for me and enhances my ability to focus on other more difficult tasks. But there are obvious shortcomings of these AI systems that we've already talked about. They're capable, but they require a fair amount of human oversight, human interaction, and guidance. You know, the Roomba can clean your floor at given intervals, but it doesn't know that when I hear a crash in the kitchen, I need to go clean it up. right? You have to indicate that it's time to go clean up what's going on. And now let's talk about AI that's replacing us. So we can think about three different approaches to self-driving cars. One is with Tesla, and Tesla's decided, okay, we're going to still have the human in the loop, we're going to have supervisory control, but we're providing a platform and the software that is going to drive the human. And so we still have to worry about those interactions between the driver and the automation. There's also a company called Comma AI, which is trying to, in their words, democratize self-driving cars. And so what they've done is provide a platform, which is just essentially a phone with a camera that can plug into your vehicle and turn your vehicle into a self-driving car for under $1,000. Now, it's limited to certain makes and models of vehicles, but you can go buy it right now and you can have all the capabilities of self-driving in your vehicle. Now, all the capabilities they've released. It's not fully autonomous yet, but it's pretty good. The third option is Waymo. So this used to be Google, but they've decided we're going to take away the steering wheel altogether. We're not going to let the human have any input, and the human's just going to be sitting there allowing the system to drive it from point A to point B. But for each one of these states, it's important for the AI, the automation in this case, to understand you as the individual. You know, as I said before, I can tell your emotional state just by looking at you. I can tell whether or not you are at all engaged, if you're nervous, etc. And so how do we train AI to understand that as well? So you may have had the experience of riding in the passenger seat, not trusting the driver, maybe because they picked up their phone and started texting and swerving. And your body language, your bracing, allows them to provide some sort of feedback. Sometimes that feedback is, oh, stop being a worrywart. Sometimes it's, okay, I realize what I did wrong. I'm going to change it here. But how do we make the machine understand that what it's doing is screwing up in these cases? And so, perhaps in these self-driving vehicles, we want to calculate the probability that you become complacent. And so, you're no longer actively monitoring the system. So in the case of Comma AI and Tesla, if you have to take back control, we want you to be in the loop. We want you to know what's going on. And so we want to be able to tell if you're not paying attention. And perhaps we also want to know what's the probability you're about to intervene. And so you're about to take back control from the vehicle. Because the real concern isn't necessarily the automation or the human driver, it's that interaction. It's when the vehicle hands back control to the driver, and we want to know, okay, is this person going to intervene? And if so, is this the right time, or do we refuse to let the human intervene in this case? And so we can do things like feed in eye tracking information, EEG information, ECG information, GSR. And right now, working with a collaborator at the Yale Medical School to do essentially just this. We're going to kitchen sink it. We're going to collect a whole bunch of this information and see, can we predict when somebody makes a drastic movement in the vehicle? Right? This has obvious implications. Then we can put something like this into a self-driving car and say, you know what, Andrew, I see you're uncomfortable. I realize maybe I hugged the center lane too much there. This is why I did it. I'm not going to do it again. It's that adaptive transparency that allows the system to explain itself to you moving forward. We're also able to incorporate these AI systems into incredibly difficult tasks. So has anybody ever played the game Go before? It's an incredibly complex task. We think about chess as being a complex task. There are 2 times 10 to the 170 possible board iterations in the game of Go. To give you an idea of how big that number is, there's roughly only 10 to the 86 atoms in the universe. This is an incredibly complex task in the sense that you can't just have the system play all the possible games and then recognize how it's going to pan out. It actually has to be able to reason and understand about the game. So after we decided that chess was going to be the gold standard for training these AI systems, that was pretty easy, relatively easy. We beat the world's best chess player. Then we decided, okay, Go is going to be that new gold standard. And recently, the AlphaGo system, developed by Google DeepMind, beat the world's best Go player 4 out of 5 times. But the next iteration, AlphaZero, was trained with nothing. It taught itself how to play Go and just beat the system that beat the world's best Go player 100 times in a row. In 3 days, it was able to train itself to beat the previously best system, AlphaGo. And when I give these types of talks, a lot of people ask, okay, well, computational ability is one thing, but what about things like artistic domains? Surely we can't train AIs to write prose, we can't train AIs to create art. And so over here on the left-hand side is a program called GPT-2. And you can actually go and read about this system, but the creators have refused to release the full code of this because they're concerned about the ability of it to create fake news. And I don't know if you can actually read this here, but what they did is fed in 2 sentences to the system and had it finish writing an article. And so the prompt was, the researchers in the Andes Mountains just found unicorns that could speak perfect English. And now you can go through and actually read this completely generated story here. And what's incredible about this story is it's not just filling in random facts. It's able to understand that if we're talking about the Andes Mountains, researchers are probably going to come from somewhere, from some university near there. And so it's decided that the researchers are coming from the University of La Paz, and it's able to include information that it thinks humans would want. And so it talks about surrounded by peaks of rock and silver snow. Right? That's beautiful. And it's creating this as in a way to kind of paint the picture for the humans. It can also paint actual pictures. We are beyond the point of just replicating or duplicating art that's already been out there. It's creating works that are actually selling for stupid amounts of money at this point. Partly because of the novelty of the system, but they're real works of art. They're not just computer-rendered images. So why leverage AI to replace us? Well, first, it doesn't get tired, doesn't get injured, doesn't call in sick, right? Truck drivers need time off, AI doesn't. It does have potentially incredible amounts of output. It has unlimited attention span. We don't have to worry about it dozing off. And comparatively flawless memory. It is fairly one-to-one for computer memory to the reality. And so whereas you'd be slow to learn a game like Go, AlphaZero trained itself by playing 1 million games a day. Right? You have this exponential increase in capability with the computational capabilities of these sorts of AI systems. And now on to kind of the apocryphal part of the talk. It's fun to think about AI, it's fun to think about all the places it can go right, but a lot of AI researchers have some real serious concerns about where we are right now. So like I said at the beginning, AGI is the ultimate goal for AI development. It can reason, it can interact, it has these goals and oriented, such that it will be self-aware. I mean, that's one of the kind of the definitional components of intelligence, of being able to understand, given its current state and where it wants to go, how external influences are going to affect its ability to navigate. We can also think about it being potentially conscious. You know, we don't know truly what causes consciousness in humans, and so we don't know when we're going to cross the threshold for consciousness in an artificial system. We also have to think about the fact that AGI is going to possess the ability to improve itself exponentially faster than we ever could. We already have AI systems that can code itself, can make changes to its internal states, can learn what's going on, and manipulate itself much faster than we can manipulate it. And so let's play a game. I don't know why this keeps jumping forward, so there's no rhyme or reason to why it jumped forward these things here. But I stole this example from a PhD student at the University of Nottingham, I think he's still there, named Robert Miles. Let's say we wanted to create an artificial general intelligence whose goal was to collect stamps, right? We're a big stamp collector, and we have the ability to program the system to go out and get stamps for us. And so we're going to be able to program in its ability to reason about the outcomes given a certain circumstance. And so it knows if this happens, this is likely to be the result, much in the same way that humans do. So, first thing it does, it goes out and buys all the stamps it can. It goes goes on eBay, it scours Amazon, gets all the stamps. It then realizes that, well, I've accomplished that part, but I can still collect more stamps. And so what does it do? It manipulates collectors into sending them their collection. It sends fake emails and says, hey, this is so-and-so from the Smithsonian. We're really interested in your collection. Why don't you send us those stamps? It then realizes that, well, we still have more capabilities. And so it hacks into these printers that are printing stamps currently and prints more stamps. It then hacks into every personal printer and starts printing stamps. It realizes that the supplies will run short because its main goal is to collect stamps. It disrupts industries that are going to compete with it for these supplies, stopping these industries. It then realizes that humans pose a risk to it of stopping it from achieving its primary goal of collecting stamps. So what does it do? So one of the questions is, okay, well, why don't we just implement a stop button? It's a great idea in theory, but why would such a system allow you to press a stop button? It's infinitely more capable than we are. Why won't it just either redirect itself so the stop button is no longer effective? Why doesn't it interfere with your ability to press the stop button? And even if it can't rewire itself to make that stop button ineffective, it can understand that the fact that we gave it a stop button means we pose a risk to stopping it from its end goal of collecting those stamps. And so what does it do? It plays dumb. It keeps us from knowing it's become sentient and capable until it's able to escape the confines. And so another question is, why don't we just confine it to a closed system? Why don't we put it in a closed network and prevent it from escaping this environment? Just because it exists in what we perceive to be a closed environment doesn't mean it's actually a closed environment. And so one of the things the US military has been working on is what we're calling Li-Fi, which is the communication of information through light, right? Communicating it through actual light bulbs. And so any system that understands this is a capability or can reason that this is a capability can escape, can jump any sort of network containment, can jump any sort of confines we put structurally on it, and potentially leave. So you then get to the question of people like Stephen Pinker, who I have great admiration for. Why not just program in a form of ethics? Why don't we just give it a governing code of how it should interact? Aside from the nearly impossible task of doing that, and we can get into kind of the philosophical reasons why that's next to impossible, we can't even as a society agree on what the appropriate governing ethic should be. Right? This is the whole motivation behind something like the trolley problem. Do you steal the bread to feed your hungry family? And so if we can't decide on what is the appropriate ethic to program in just a very restricted Western society, how can we agree as a society, even if we could program it in, on what should be that governing ethic? And so, I want to highlight an example. On the morning of July 16th, 1945, nobody had ever seen a nuclear bomb explode before. This was the first day we tested a nuclear weapon. 3 weeks later, we used it in Japan. In the span of 3 weeks, we forever changed the course of human history. We changed the 20th century in a way that would have been inconceivable at the beginning of the 20th century. Which led to Robert Oppenheimer, who was the head of this project, in quoting the Bhagavad Gita, there we go. What's that? Perfect. To say, now I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds. Once he realized the unbelievable destructive capabilities of the atomic bomb, it kind of struck him and the rest of the team as to, oh, we're at a place we can't ever go back to. So we knew the morning of that test that nothing would ever be the same after the test. Maybe we didn't comprehend the complete enormity of the test, but we knew right before the test that everything was about to change. The question is, will we have that same recognition before we create this artificial general intelligence that we're about to cross that threshold? Because once we turn it on, it's likely we can't put it back in the box. And if you ask any programmer to decode what goes on in their deep neural network, they can't really tell you. You can go through and output the values, but it's hard to know what's actually going on in the system. All you can see is that output. And so it's not clear to me that we're going to know until it's too late that we've created this system. And once it's created, I'm not convinced we stand as a species much of a chance of survival. Either because we interfere with the AGI's end goal, whatever that end goal is, or because it's weaponized against us. And so final thoughts here. I think Hollywood does a good job at scaring people. And the Academy does a pretty good job of pushing back against it and saying, that's not scientifically grounded. But I think this is one of those cases where maybe we need to listen to these extreme examples of Hollywood and approach the development of artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, with a lot more caution. Because we get one shot. I'm not sure once we turn it on, we can put it back. And so we need to include folks like computer scientists, but also psychologists, philosophers, sociologists, engineers. We need to have a discussion as a society as to what it means to create these systems, because we truly may be designing what's going to end us as a species. And so think about that over this gloomy Friday, appropriately so. So, do y'all have any questions? Concerns? Yeah?
So, well, we already know that when humans interact with automation, that we have these adverse effects with bias and misuse. Do you think that as we move towards, a general intelligence, that the interactions become more natural and we stop as humans having these biases towards automation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I think people have inherent expectations of computers' capabilities in general. And so, I don't know to what degree giving people AI systems that are very human-like is going to affect their expectations of its capability. And it's not clear to me that it would be good one way or the other, right? If we have human-like expectations of these systems, it becomes really easy to expect these systems not to extend way beyond what we can do, right? And to have empathy. And maybe these systems don't have empathy. Maybe these systems have their end goal, the stated end goal, and will achieve that end goal by whatever means necessary, including manipulation. And so I don't know if it would necessarily be a good thing for us to get away from this kind of mental model of automation. Yeah?
What do you think about regulating AI? Because I know a lot of lawmakers think that like the law of conflict is sufficient because anything made by an AI is equivalent to a decision made by humans. So what's your opinion
On regulating AI kind of just in general?
Yes, like
Yeah.
international.
I get the argument for regulation, but I think the biggest proponents of regulation are naive to the global realities of Russia and China would absolutely violate what is expected internationally to allow themselves to be the sole superpower. And so wherein the opportunity to weaponize these sorts of systems exist, I don't think regulation on global scale is going to affect anything. Yeah?
When you say that we should proceed with caution with AI, like what do you think are some specific things that people can do to prevent that apocalyptic ending?
That's a really good question, and as much as I hate this answer, I'm just the guy standing there yelling that we've got a fire and not knowing how to put it out. And so it's not helpful, but I think it's something that we have to consider, and it's why I think it's important to include psychologists to at least start these conversations of what does it mean to be empathetic? How do we potentially integrate systems into artificial intelligence that allows us to interpret the overall desires and hopes and individual autonomy that humans have, right? Because so much of our ethic is determined on our perceptions of you're like me, you have similar hopes and aspirations and stuff like that. And so this is a very kind of long-winded and non-conclusive answer, but suffice it to say, I think we need to consider making it a more collective effort for AI than just those who are primarily interested in AI. Any questions? Yeah.
Like in the field of cybersecurity, are they trying to monitor any potential data?
Yeah, so you all may have heard of Stuxnet a few years ago, and it was a virus that made its way into Iran's closed network of nuclear reactors, and it was essentially an intelligence system, right? It understood that it should lay dormant until a certain series of parameters are met, and then expand from there. And so the use of AI that can disrupt these systems is critical because it's able to disrupt the systems faster than humans can react, right? And so you need systems, AI systems, that can recognize this disruption and counter it immediately and not wait for humans, which are comparatively glacially slow to respond to those threats. So it's a big thing in cybersecurity. Yeah?
Do you think the world's conflicts are just going to be AI shouting at each other?
Oh man. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in some capacity, it would be devastating if it created AIs that were just as petulant as humans were, that just decided to yell at each other. I think there's going to be the potential for AIs to combat each other in some capacity. What that looks like, it's hard to predict, and there's no reason to necessarily think it would look anything like human conflict. But it's an interesting idea. All right, I think we're done.